Now, when coming up for ideas for what I was going to paint next on this channel, I was doing a bit of a deep dive and I came across Netflix's new show called Blue-Eyed Samurai. Now, this is an animation that is a depiction of Edo period Japan, so in the 1600s, and it is a beautiful representation of that era. It's wonderfully composed, it's got great shots, everything about it is gorgeous, and it rekindled in me my love of the book by James Clavell called Shogun that I read back in 2011. As you see, my copy is pretty worn and battered, but the story inside is as rich as ever. And I love this aesthetic of Asia and Japan, and I want to be able to play in that world for a little. So I've been looking through my reference files of photos that I took myself when I was in Japan, as well as reference packs that I've bought and have the rights to use the images of. And whilst I'm not going to be pulling directly from the book, I am going to be playing in that world for a bit. Something that I particularly love that came out of Blue-Eyed Samurai were these black, white, and red illustrations. Recently, I've been really actually wanting to explore getting away from color. Maybe not necessarily going to full black and white, but just focusing on value and shifts in temperature. Now, this is not a new idea by any stretch of the imagination. It's been happening for quite a while. For example, there are a number of American illustrators that would work in duotone in black, white, and red back when printing had limited color capabilities. Here are a few examples of an illustrator called Mead Schaefer, where he's done just that. He's used black, white, and red, black, white, and blue, and just created an incredibly strong sense of value and used just that single color to shift the temperature of certain areas. And I really want to try and utilize some of that in this piece that I'm going to be working on. Now, recently I've been using the website iStock to get some great reference photos, and they have pictures on there that you can buy the licenses for and use them for your own paintings, which is what I did for this one. Before I start the painting, I want to show you just how much I've altered the reference to suit my ideals. I chose this photo because I love the stance of the character, I love the costuming, I love the environment, the setting. However, I think the aspect ratio is quite cramped, the composition isn't particularly refined, he's sort of off-center, so I needed to make a few edits. So I've brought that image into Photoshop to make some various adjustments. I've widened the aspect ratio of the entire piece. I've altered the size of the buildings around him to better frame and utilize the space. I've increased the amount of atmosphere behind him to enforce his silhouette. I've drastically decreased the level of the saturation so it almost looks like a sepia tone photo. And for a bit of storytelling, as inspired by those Blue-Eyed Samurai posters, I've indicated these blood splatters throughout the floor to create just a bit of that graphic design that I wanted to get into this piece. Now, this Photoshop comp is a bit rough and ready, but it has enough information to give me what I want in order to proceed with the painting. Then once I've got the drawing transferred down onto the canvas, I'm ready to get started. Now, as I've mentioned in other videos, I'm pretty procedural with how I block in paintings. I want to get the entire surface covered and everything established so that I can better perceive what I'm putting down. And I want to make a point about that. On pretty much any painting that I work on, everything gets about 3 passes. I need to get things filled in, and then I can refine it, and then I can do some final adjustments. I'm getting fairly good at being able to visualize the final image, and you could say, well, why don't I just paint it as I want it finished in the first place? Excellent question. I'm speaking for myself here, but maybe I'll be speaking for others. I am only able to see so much at once. My first crack at a painting, I am trying to get the right value in the right color and lay it down in the place where it belongs. But that first pass is like your best educated guess. It's going to get you approximately in the right place, but it's not going to get you bang on. You need to get something down on the surface in order to react to something. Now, personally, I'm not a huge fan of working on a white canvas. I like to tone my canvas, mostly with a raw umber. In this occasion I did it with a burnt umber, doesn't really matter. But so in this occasion I am reacting to that burnt umber. Everything is being, all of my values, all of my color, even though this is a subdued color, I am reacting to that burnt umber. So I am cooling everything down in response to that. So what this first pass does is help generate context. I have a context of value of color and what I can react to. And as I go in with the second pass of everything, as you see I'm doing now, this allows me to better hone in and get the color I want to go for. I dare use the term accurate color because you might have whatever color scheme you're working on a painting, but it will let me get a more refined version of the color and the value that I'm shooting for in this particular piece. Now, as I mentioned, I'm actually going for pretty subdued or almost no color in this painting. I'm actually using a very strange palette. It's a very earth tone palette. It's a mixture of ivory black, sepia, raw umber, burnt umber, yellow ochre, and later on I'm going to be introducing Scarlet Lake into that graphic design of the blood, and that's the only place where I'm going to be using that. I'm not going to be using that pigment anywhere else in this image. That's going to give me a very earth tone or earth gamut to this entire painting and get the effect that I want to go for. The sepia and the ivory are going to act as a warm and cool black. The raw umber and burnt umber are going to be a warm and cool brown. And that yellow ochre is going to just give some warmth to the whites that I'm introducing into certain areas. Now in areas on the background, such as on these norins behind the figure, I'm working wet into wet, trying to blend my edges as I'm painting the entire thing, because I want to create an almost depth of field or depth of focus effect and have things blur behind him as they recede in the image and have him come really into focus. On the architectural elements of the painting, it's all about patience, just taking the time to carefully carve out the right things on each slat of every bit of the architecture. It's honestly one of the more laborious parts of a painting like this, but it is very satisfying once it's done and you get the overall effect. Then with a soft, flat brush, I'm just blocking in that graphic element of the blood on the floor. And I'm not using red right out of the tube, it is a mixture of Scarlet Lake muted down with ivory black. Now, although the main subject of this painting is the samurai as the character, I actually spent the majority of my time, about 10 days in fact, painting and establishing the environment. It is my personal preference to establish the environment that a character is within and then place them in it, rather than get to the character too quickly and then try to paint the environment around it. I like to just put the character in a setting that they belong inside. Now, if you're following along and enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Alright, now back to the painting. And then we get to what is arguably the most crucial element of the entire painting, which is the portrait. The whole painting could make or break around this element. Now this face is barely the size of a quarter, or less than a 50p piece if you're in England, which basically means it's liable to be a right pain to paint. But luckily I'm getting fairly experienced at painting tiny faces, so the way I approach it is in stages, just like everything else. The nature of oil paint, it's buttery, it's messy, and painting a tiny face, it's liable to end up in a big pile of mud. So to tackle that, the first pass, I just want to establish some basic values, a light side, a dark side, and some highlights, and then leave it alone. Let it dry, get away from it. Then I come back, and this is where I treat it like a big lump of clay. I'm adding mass, I'm carving things out, I'm taking things away. This is where I treat it like a real sculpture and try to carve out those main shapes and get the expression that I want on the character. Then when I've got it to a particular stage, I know I've got to leave it alone, otherwise I'm just going to be trying to paint into wet paint, smushing things around. It's time to leave it alone, let it dry again, and then come back. Then with some fresh eyes, you can really start to tweak out the little aspects that you want, get the curve of the lip right, get the particular highlight right, you'll start to be able to finesse and scumble in those final elements to really bring it into focus and get the face that you want in the image. I spent about 7 hours total on that tiny face, but spread over about 3 days. As I was looking at the ground, whilst it was in the right value range, the lighting looked right, it just looked so flat and boring and dull, and I really wanted to incorporate getting some texture onto the surface. As I said earlier, I wanted to try and push that depth of field effect, so I want you to be able to see the texture at the front and have it recede as it goes back into the image. To do that, I'm introducing a bit of controlled chaos. I'm using a bristle dagger brush, some darker paint with some liquid impasto medium, and just trying to generate some of that effect of like the gravel that he's standing on. What I don't want to do is start painting little tiny dots to try and paint the exact gravel. I'm more so trying to use brushwork to generate that effect and build up that layer. And this was one of the more challenging elements of this painting. I actually didn't quite know how to go about this. This was more experimental, just seeing what worked, trying to mix up big, thick areas in the right value and lay it down in a stroke that gave the impression of the gravel of the path that he's standing on. Now, I don't use dagger brushes a lot, but this one was great as it just gave me just what I needed to introduce some randomness. It's a bit of a splayed end to the brush. I don't have full control over it, but it was giving me that effect that I was really trying to go for. So now that everything is filled in and established, I can really see how some things need to be tweaked. So what I'm doing, I'm using some Kremnitz white, which is quite transparent, and a bit of raw umber, and scumbling or glazing in a little bit more atmosphere behind him to lighten up everything and reinforce his silhouette. I'm using a soft brush, trying to be really quite delicate as I don't want big globules of paint deposited down. I just want enough to lighten everything behind him and not mar the information that I've put down. Now when it came time to refine his Hayori, the drapery in his upper half, this was perhaps the most enjoyable part of the whole painting. I love painting drapery, it's very satisfying. And I've already established the main planes of his drapery. I have all the folds blocked in. I know where the shadows and light sides are. Then I got to lay that very intricate design on top of it, just really paying close attention to my reference, seeing those dark shapes, carving them out, and then delicately laying in all the swirling designs around that. Now the truth is, when you're doing a narrative painting like this, there are going to be some parts you're going to enjoy painting more than others. Whether it's an architectural piece or something that's more based in nature, just painting some areas will be more monotonous, but there will be some parts, for me it's drapery, it's just purely enjoyable in the moment. As long as it's going well and you're not messing it up, it really is a pleasure to paint, and it's super satisfying when it comes out well. Now the final thing I have left to do on this painting is fill in the signage here on the right. Towards the end of any painting, you might find yourself going over the whole piece, finding little things that need tweaking here and there. This can actually be one of the most tedious parts of the whole process because you're so close to being finished, but you have a number of tiny bits that need adjusting. Personally, I'm trying to get those done just a little bit earlier and save something to finish the painting on a high note. And here's the final painting in all its glory. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also support me and my work over at patreon.com/Daniel Macaluso. And if you want, you can purchase this painting at macalusoarts.com. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.